Hey there, it's chapter 10. This is a big chapter with lots of information, so we're going to try this webcast thing and sort of see how it goes. So hang with me for just a second. I want to point out to you a couple of different things in the book. This chapter's got all kinds of different things to look at. I like page 234. We'll talk about gerrymandering this chapter, and it's got a crazy picture on 234. It's got trivia in here on page 240. There's all kinds of crazy stuff in here to look at, but I want to start with just a few pieces to get us started in this chapter before we get together in class tomorrow. All right, so here's what we've got. You should have an outline. You should have gotten one in class today, and I'd like to go through that with you. All right, different kinds of campaigns out there, presidential versus congressional, two different phases, and I mentioned this back last chapter about the fact that when you're running for president especially, it's a whole lot like running two different campaigns, one geared towards getting nominated, and then once you're nominated, running a campaign to get elected. So we've talked about caucuses before. We said at a national level, we don't use caucuses anymore. They were pretty susceptible to corruption, but at the state level, they happen all the time, especially at local level, state level, whatever. It says caucus is a meeting of party members and supporters of various candidates. Caucuses at the national level were very private. At the state level, it just depends on the state. At the national level, we prefer the convention, political meeting of members of one party. The Democrats had theirs in Philadelphia. The Republicans had theirs in Cleveland. It's very public. It's open to politicians, perhaps celebrities, and definitely delegates and superdelegates. If you want to get nominated, you've got to win the primaries. Each state has a primary election. It says an election held to choose candidates for office. The more primaries you win, the more likely you are to get nominated because you will have delegates who have pledged their support to you and hopefully some superdelegates too. All right, so this is on the outline. It says presidential races are more competitive than House representative races. Yeah, more power, more competitiveness. Fewer people vote in a midterm election. You need to know that a midterm election is called an off-year election. In presidential elections, you have 50-ish% of the population that comes out to vote. In a midterm or off-year election, it's more like 33%. There's a dramatic decline, Congressional candidates can serve their constituents. You are a constituent. You've got two senators and a representative, and they can serve you by getting you in and out of the White House on a tour, which is opening back up under Melania Trump. They can help you with recommendations. We've had lots of people out of Collierville High School get recommendations into the Air Force Academy or Naval Academy. There's certain things they can do for you. Congressional candidates can campaign against Washington. Think back to November, people who were wanting to run for office. It was David Kustoff, I think was the name of the guy I'm thinking of. I'm going to go to Washington and I'm going to show them what it's like to be a real American, and I'm going to take back Washington and get rid of the politicians that are corrupt, and they can run against Washington when they campaign. The power of the presidential coattails have declined. That's what's next. Presidential coattail. This is something that we saw under Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, and again with Barack Obama, especially in 2008. When you have somebody at the top of the ballot, like a president, and that president is so confident and energetic and inspires confidence and inspiration in people, when the person at the top of the ballot is like that, it will encourage voters, consciously, subconsciously, to continue to vote for that person's party all the way down the ballot. So in 1980, and then again in 2008, we saw a coattail effect where with Ronald Reagan, he was voted in as a Republican, and all across the country, at the national, state, and even local levels, they saw a coattail effect of many, many Republicans getting voted in. Barack Obama, Ronald Reagan, both pretty good examples of that. All right. If you want to run for president, you got to get mentioned. Okay, you might say to an intern or somebody near to you that you're thinking about running for office. Oftentimes people leak that kind of information. Maybe you say it in the presence of some news media. They happen to be in the same room, but they're not interviewing you. Get that that seed out there, and all of a sudden people are going to want to know if you're running or not. That's going to get your name out there. We've had lots of people go around and give speeches all across the country. Ronald Reagan spent a lot of time just traveling around and making speeches. If you want to run for president, maybe it's helpful to have a famous name. I don't know if you're familiar with John Glenn. He was from Ohio. He was an astronaut. He had a famous name, and people thought, he's already pretty famous. He was a senator. Maybe he'll run for president. If you get yourself identified with a major piece of legislation or an investigation, if your name is out there in the news, people will be like, well, maybe they were thinking about running for president. You've got to have your name out there. We've seen many of our presidents come to us by being a governor of a really big state. All of these things are good, but you also need to take a very hard look at where you think your money's coming from. Okay, it's one thing to get your name out there in front of the public, but then privately, you want to check with your friends and your colleagues and your campaign contributors. Hey, if I run for president, will you support me? Because you can get your name out there all you want. If there's no money there to help back up your campaign, you're pretty much dead in the water. Like I said, Ronald Reagan went around the country for almost 6 years, making speeches, getting his name out there, getting ready to run. Walter Mondale, the book says, spent about 4 years. Both of those gentlemen were in office at the time they were doing this. The book says you may have to resign from office first to spend this kind of time on a campaign, but oftentimes, and especially now, those people are sort of doing double duty. They're supposed to be serving their constituents, but they're also out campaigning. So some folks complain, especially if it's your governor that's left your state to go campaign for president. Those people sometimes start to complain that their needs aren't being met by their governor, and that's what he or she's been elected to do. So it's just something to think about. This chapter is all about money, lots and lots of information about money. An individual can spend up to $2,000 on a campaign, okay, without too many questions being asked. PACs, which we said as political action committees, can spend about $5,000 in each election on each candidate. Says candidates must raise $5,000 in 20 states in individual contributions of $250 or less to qualify for federal matching grants and to pay for primary campaigns. Remember a few chapters ago we talked about grants and strings being attached? Does this sound familiar, I hope? Okay, let me read that again. Must raise at least $5,000 in 20 states and individual contributions of $250 or less to qualify for federal matching grants. Those are strings and strings and more strings. You're wanting to run for president, you've got to be organized, you've got to have a large staff, paid staff. Think about where your money's coming from. You've got to be able to pay these folks. Oftentimes you'll say, hey, if I win, you can have a job in the White House. That's one thing, but that doesn't pay the bills. You've got to have a large paid staff. You've got to have volunteers, young and old. You've got to have advisors on your issues. Now, advisors may or may not be paid, but again, you can say to them, look, come with me. If we win, you can have a position in the White House. Wanting to run for president, you've got to have a strategy. Incumbents are people who are already in office, typically defend their records. This is why I did what I did. This is why I voted yes. This is why I voted no. Challengers attack the incumbents, that he shouldn't have done this or he shouldn't have done that. The book says they try to set a positive or negative tone. They can start positive, but we all know by the end people are mudslinging. That negative tone doesn't take real long to come through, unfortunately. As far as themes go, the book mentions trust, confidence, Compassionate conservatism. That last one, compassionate conservatism, was straight out of the 2000 election between George W. Bush. That was his slogan, compassionate conservatism. He was running against Al Gore. Your theme can make a difference. Your slogan, and that sounds so silly, your slogan, your colors, your campaign look, that can make a big difference. We are a very visual society. If you think back to, and I guess maybe I hope you learned this in U.S. history last year, if you think back to the Nixon-Kennedy debate, okay, the people listening to it thought Nixon won, the people watching it thought Kennedy won, and we began to see why visuals did matter. And certainly we're very visual now. When you're thinking about strategy, you have to figure out what your timing is going to be. Are you going to try to get a jump on things and get that early momentum, or are you going to sort of slow and steady and reserve your energy and your other resources for later, assuming you make it to later, if you continue to win those primaries? If you lose all kinds of primaries, you're going to drop out. You're going to say it was an honor, thank you so much, and you'll back off. So you've got to sort of figure out your strategy on momentum and energy and money. You've also got to choose your target. You've got to figure out who's your audience. Okay, am I going to appeal to Latinos, women, good old boys, whatever? Who am I going to target, and who do I think I can sway to my side? That's an important thing too. Not just the people you can get because it's a safe state or whatever, but who can I maybe convince to come with me? All right, that's it for tonight. I will see you in class tomorrow, and thanks so much for listening. Guys, if you've got any questions about this, let me know. Talk with me tomorrow in class. Bye.